Welcome to Fortune Forecast. I am Daisy, your hostess, and you are in my book playlist. In this video, we will go into a new book. It is titled The Gist of It for Healing, Health, and Happiness. It was written by Haydon Rochester in 1919, published by the H.S. Crocker Company in San Francisco. It is in the public domain. I landed on this book as I was reading another book that we do have on our playlist titled TNT, It Rocks the Earth, in where Claude Bristol, the author of that book, lauded the content of the gist of it and mentioned it in his book. If you are new to my channel, welcome. If you had a chance to go through my channel, it is an eclectic space that represents the things that I like to do, exploring the self, understanding our place in the world through understanding the mind, the body, the spirit, and these connections. So if there's something that you like here and you'd like to stay, that's awesome. If you just want to stay for this book, that's great. And if you like the eclectic nature of my channel, sit back, enjoy, and subscribe. So now let's move on to this book. I am really looking forward to seeing what we're going to discover. If you are ready, I invite you with me on this journey to the gist of it for healing, health, and happiness. After the hardcover, there is a first page which actually has the title and a few things I'd like to share with you. The title, The Gist of It for Healing, Health, and Happiness by Haydon Rochester, MD. Quote, "And with thy getting, get understanding, for you do not have to fight, you do not have to struggle, you only have to know." End quote. Published by H.S. Crocker Company, San Francisco. The gist of it: you can be well. No disease is a thing in itself, but is either a reaction or a compromise. Acute disease is nature's reaction to contamination and signifies vitality. Prompt recovery is the rule. Chronic disease is a needless compromise of feelings, tension, morbid suggestion, ignorance, fear, and neglect. It is therefore but an artificial thing, and you can break it. The law of healing is the perfect law, silent but eternally operative. You can be happy. Unhappiness is merely maladjustment or the final effect of faulty adaptations. Readjustment is always feasible with restoration to capabilities otherwise undreamed. You can prosper. It is the God-wished birthright of every living creature that he be well, happy, and prosperous in terms of his own unfolding personality. You are an aspiring human soul. Receive and demonstrate now. Introduction. The writer of this book was born and bred to be a physician, being the fourth of his name in his own family, and having been afforded the utmost advantage in training, both in this country and Europe, may be presumed to be qualified to take an intelligent and experienced view of the subjects herein considered. Succeeding some years of general medical and surgical practice, the special field of nervous and mental disorder was cultivated, and this revealed the importance of a comprehensive knowledge of psychology, which shows, by penetrating the first causes in the problem of human disability, that about 4/5 of all ailment consists essentially of mental or emotional tension, reacting upon the mind or the body to produce the symptoms manifested. In other words, most abnormalities are in fact nothing more than the outward evidence of an unresolved, straining compromise among motives in conflict, or the material resultants of contending internal and strictly psychological forces, frequently unconscious or subconscious, and therefore requiring this objective exposition to the end that they may be dissipated. Part 1 of this volume presents the psychology involved. Part 2 sets forth the basic principles of good health and healing, and Part 3 presumes to rationalize a still higher realization without which no soul is sound. The book should be read more than once in order to derive its full message, which is purposely compressed for transmissions, and occasion is here taken to make a grateful acknowledgement to the psychoanalyst for an essential element in the writer's professional equipment, to Mrs. Harriet L. McCollum, Psychological Lecturer Supreme, for her practical awakening to the resources of the subconscious, for the gracious inspirations embodied in Part 3, and to all others who both knowingly and unknowingly have contributed to the author's enlightenment and unfoldment. Part 1. Psychology. Elementary Principles. In opening a subject, it is good to present immediately the gist of one's argument and to set forth clearly its basic principles. That the mind rules the body and that much sickness is really mental is occasionally recognized, but exactly how and why this has never been fully explained. We here propose to show that mental and emotional tension, being preeminently dynamic, is correspondingly responsible for all manifestation and the modifications observed. In other words, thoughts and feelings are the unceasing forces which move and fashion our otherwise inert bodies and are even responsible for their creation. Energy. Our first realization should be that of universal basis of all manifest existence in energy, the living, indestructible, yet convertible urging vibration, which is constantly accumulating within us, to be from time to time discharged in physical, mental, or emotional activity. We here give the full comprehensive meaning to the word energy, whose electronic condensations compose the atoms of physical matter, and which manifest otherwise in the well-known forms of light, heat, electricity, motion, growth, etc., then mind, and supremely as spirit. As living beings, we are constantly assimilating and generating energy out of its sources about us and within ourselves where it accumulates. As human beings, we express this energy in physical and mental action or function. Hence, rather than mere bodies, we are in reality active, sentient organizations of energy, for whom normality requires a sound, well-nourished physical structure in progressing phases of adequate, coherent function, varied by rest and recreation, and actuated by innate motives in harmonious adjustment. In other words, a state of appropriate healthy balance between accumulation and disposition of energy is essential to well-being. Mind and body. Psychology signifies the manner in which energy operates mentally, and to successfully cope with disease and disorder, we must become acquainted with certain psychological mechanisms such as suggestion, distraction, repression, and the like, and realize the absolute unity of the organism as a whole. The mind and the body are not separate things, but are merely differing aspects of the one unified self. Changes in one of the whole aspects are reflected in all the others. For example, the motions of fear and anxiety paralyze and contract the mind. This condition is then conducted to all parts of the body, and contraction becomes the order in every cell and structure. Because of differing personal susceptibility, this contraction when persistent, may clutch the bronchial tubes as asthma, the muscles of the back with spinal pain or bony displacement, the walls of the stomach, causing dyspepsia, the tissues of the kidney producing Bright's disease, or it may warp the general state of being with some nervous affection, or even mental derangement. On the other hand, real disorder in a bodily part sends its distress to the mind, whose consequent strain of suffering and fear can keep returning to the part, even when it might recover, and form a vicious circle of chronic disability which persists indefinitely until the mental strain is removed. This intimate association between mind and body is well attested by such obvious illustrations as the reddening of the face in shame or embarrassment, disturbance of heart action by fear, nausea produced by a repulsive thought, obstructed liver and constipation from anxious constraint, excessive kidney action from feverish excitement, and numerous others, to say nothing of the corresponding recovery when the distressing emotion fades. Such purely psychological elements as emotions, then, by their definite influence on the responsive tissues, are seen to determine physical conditions, but to fully explain the responsibility for continuous disease and disorder, additional factors must be considered. Psychological mechanisms. All that we know or react to comes to us in the form of impression or sensation. Hence, this is the first phase of any experience. Detection or recognition follows next, accompanied by association to previous experiences, and this is called perception. At the same time, there begins reaction, with little or much emotion, according to the intensity of the experience, and the coming into an adjustment or attitude. From this point, any further progress or the direction of it is purely a matter of choice. We do something about the experience or not, according to our motives and impulses. These are the simple elements, but there are also more intricate mechanisms. Suggestion. The first of these is suggestion, or that process by which an idea is implanted with sufficient power to ensure response. Suggestion may be intensified by repetition and by reinforcement from previous associations or other sources of similar suggestion. It is a law to which all are amenable and is most effective when arising from or attended by physical sensation, which means that when we feel pain, we are caused to believe something wrong, which is true, but suggestion may tend to exaggerate the sensation and give it undue significance. Indigestion, for example, causes excess of gas in the stomach, which by pressure on the heart can disturb its action and give some of the sensations and thereby the suggestion of heart disease. Treatment directed to the heart would then but reinforce this suggestion, as would also the repetition of the fancied heart symptoms, which are resulting solely from the neglected stomach. Distraction. Suggestion is further favored by distraction, which may exist as a disturbed, preoccupied, or resistless mental state induced by some undercurrent of feeling, an injury, a shock, or perhaps by deliberate mental fixation, which narrows or absorbs the power to reason clearly and permits the adverse suggestions to take deeper root. If the subject having indigestion, for instance, were under great nervous strain from worry, his mind so distracted would not be free to discount the sensation of heart disturbance as merely gas in the stomach, and the more adverse suggestion of heart disease would then be absorbed and manifested. Defense. Moreover, a mechanism of defense may come in play, leading one, when hard pressed, to accept a suggestion just as it comes, as a way of escape from some obligation or predicament, and perhaps unconsciously. But when these mechanisms operate, the resulting disorder is liable to settle down into the inertia of habit. For with a line of lessened resistance established, the original sensations will doubtless recur and continue to hammer their ominous suggestions into both mind and body, which in the manner shown may take them up and express them, spurious though they are. It might even be inferred that the indigestion which arose in the first place was merely due to worry, was perhaps aggravated by some dietary indiscretion, and would have been quite transitory except for the other factors. A sufferer from heart disease is thereby released from much, and we can all remember feeling sick to stay home from school. So countless others examples affecting any combination of organs and with varying undercurrents of mixed motives will readily suggest themselves. Repression. A further determining mechanism is that of repression, which again brings out the importance of knowing these things in terms of energy. And since additional factors are also involved, we can get a better grasp of these problems by studying a psychological unit, for instance, a single expression, such as a simple contact, like that of the palm of my hand touching the top of my desk. This experience consists of the emotion of the hand descending in the air and then stopped by the desk, with the thus deflected energy transmitted to my tissues and thence to my consciousness as an impulse or sensation. Should this contact be made with violence or a slam, I would receive a surcharge of energy or feeling and be thrown out of equilibrium into a state of tension, attended by tingling nerves and general strain, which would last some time unless I went through reactions to discharge this surcharge, such as rubbing my hand or uttering some expletive with feeling, when the tension would relax and relief at once be felt. But for some motive, I might choose to repress all reaction and maintain perfect composure when, if there were many repetitions, a limit to undisturbed endurance would be reached, and the strain would be reflected in my general condition. In other words, the energy of the blow is received by my organism as an impact or charge which accumulates on repetition. And if I refuse to discharge the tension by reacting, puts me to great pains and eventually manifests efforts to contain it. The complex. Every experience means the delivery into one of a definite volume of energy, and the same law holds in our more complex and highly organized experiences. The shock of a true bereavement, for instance, lays upon us a weight of crushing force, which holds and wears us down and distorts our normal state of being, just so long as we retain it by repressing all emotion, and begins to lighten and release us in proportion as we vent our feelings and permit the reactions which restore equilibrium. Such a volume of repressed, held in feeling constitutes a complex or mental sore, whose feeling tone, undischarged and racking the system, makes for distraction and exposes us to a train of pathological events similar to the one outlined, whereas reacting appropriately in response to the urgent pressure, we retain no vulnerable spot, but return to normal balance and even acquire increased endurance for succeeding stresses which are bound to come. Furthermore, this same principle obtains in the case of agreeable emotions, for mirth demands its outlet in laughing just as much as sorrow in weeping. Conversion. It might be objected here that it is not well to keep dwelling upon one's troubles, which of course is true, for it merely aggravates them and leads to the disintegrating habit of self-pity. Though, if a particular train of lament or complaint is being carried beyond due limits, it is because it is used as a partial or substitute vent for deeper trouble that is covered over, and therefore all the more in need of discovering and discharging. For the feeling that is fermenting in these submerged mental complexes reacts on the bodily tissues and undergoes conversion into physical symptoms. So that obstinate physical nausea, for instance, can be due entirely to a suppressed mental repugnance and will disappear completely upon discharge of its underlying complex. Hence, conversion is another important psychopathological mechanism and suggestive of the requirements for correction. Summary. But before passing on, we should recapitulate, beginning with constant, inexorable energy, indestructible and self-perpetuating, but capable of infinite transmutation. Our first awareness of it is as sensation, then perception, then reactive emotion and discharge, with return to equilibrium, or repressive tension and conversion into symptoms, which may be intensified and prolonged by suggestion, favored by distraction and defense, and then merge into inertia of habit. 4/5 of all human disability, that is to say, all nervous, mental, functional, and unduly chronic disorders, as well as many continuous organic diseases, are constructed out of just these mechanisms and nothing else. But since they ordinarily develop unconsciously or subconsciously out of reach of effective adjustment by their victims, we should now consider the subconscious. In fact, were these processes not subconscious in the narrow sense, there could be no conversion into symptoms, for consciousness provides a vent by means of analysis and adjustment, which the individual subconscious does not. And therefore the symptoms appear automatically because their component energies remain undischarged and undisposed. The subconscious. The subconscious is not another mysterious or separate mind, but is rather that major portion of the entire self which at a given moment is out of the immediate focus of conscious attention, but which normally is explorable by it, and wherein are enacted all those usually unnoted automatic or reflex activities such as breathing, heartbeat, habitual movements, etc., our delicate reactions to situations and people, the reception of those subtle impressions which make up the phenomena of telepathy, premonition, and the like, and the insidious suggestion of disease, in fact, all the processes of being except those with which one happens to be consciously concerned at the time. These subconscious activities, which comprehend all the forces of the individual and are made up of the entire mass of impressions and reactions undergone by the organism as a whole, are therefore infinitely more powerful than those actuated by mere reason, which can only use what may be put into articulate formula. It can also be inferred what power of resistance is here possessed, as well as tenacity, which amounts for the stubborn character of disorders having their basis in this field. Dissociation. The ability to direct attention is largely under control of the will, and a normal individual is able to focus this consciousness on any portion of himself or his environment and to know it as it actually is. One may also, if so disposed, withdraw consciousness from a given area and ignore the reactions taking place in it, when they will nevertheless take place subconsciously. But since the entire self is in relation with itself and with the whole environment, and interactions continually occur, this partial oblivion can only be achieved by forcibly narrowing the range of consciousness so as to exclude the repugnant portion, which then becomes as though divided off at the expense of the whole for the reception and carrying on of the repudiated impressions and reactions. If these impressions and suppressed reactions persist, more and more of the self will be appropriated for their requirements until this split-off portion becomes strong enough to pursue an almost independent existence, with division of the self in a manner which manifests as a dual or disassociated personality. Persons so affected hear voices when none speak, some reaction in the secondary self making itself mentally audible as a message or command from without, and inducing various conflicts with aberration of conduct or literal unbalancing of mind. A grievous disillusionment, for instance, might be resisted and rejected with such depth of protest as to result in such dissociation, for assuming that the grounds for it are genuine, they will affect the subject accordingly, even if only subconsciously, eventually divide the self as shown above, and if persistent induce some outcry in the form of visions, warnings, or commands which result in acts that seem preposterous or insane. It becomes quite obvious how readily a mind at such disadvantage would drift along helplessly under the influence of the mechanisms already traced and of others still more intricate, conjuring up delusions, illusions, and hallucinations, whirled along by obsessions and victimized by fears. But all such states are unsubstantial, inherently artificial, without endurance of their own, and would tend to fade and clear up if it were not that they are being renewed from a still deeper and more enduring source. What then keeps them going? The answer is dynamic personal motive, instinct, or desire, pluralized into numerous motives, which are the real, inexhaustible springs of our actions, though often disguised and not always in harmony. Motives. The abnormalities under consideration, as previously stated, constitute nothing more than a straining compromise of conflicting personal considerations or motives. Or stated more technically, they are but the outward resultants of contending interior and strictly psychological forces operating in terms of the mechanisms described. We give to these forces the name of motives, although in the absolute they are resolved into a single ongoing one, the urge of being, which, however, manifests and best lends itself to analysis as a trinity, comprising the basic motives, instincts, or urges of self-preservation, self-projection, and self-respect. These three compelling motives, with their extended corollaries, determine all that we do and are on earth, sick or well, so it will be profitable now to consider them. Self-preservation. The first includes not only the instinct of self-preservation or desire for existence, but the wish to live well, in the best possible circumstances, and to secure some of the good things of life. The second, self-projection, embraces the love motive, sex urge, and social instinct, whereby we mate, expand our feelings, and seek to enjoy and engage with our fellow beings. This also includes the love of liberty and the urge toward self-expression in all desired forms. Self-respect. The third motive, that of self-respect, comprehends honor, decency, virtue, loyalty, pride, striving for an ideal, living up to one's principles, and desiring to stand well. Conflict. A grand galaxy, we may well feel, but how they can contend with one another. The possibilities of discord in one lacking wisdom are obvious. Passion periodically besieges virtue, and honor has always to fight greed of gain, though the conflicts at fault are usually far more subtle, and with the opposing pull or push of each element manifest only in the twist of disorder. There are also inhibiting or constraining factors, what might be called negative motives, which act as brakes upon our positive impulses, namely considerations of prudence, shame, or fear. Through ultimate analysis could easily identify these with the preceding, together with opposing desire or not to do, not to be, not to have what is. Out of these constant, often conflicting or thwarted motives and the contrary emotions they then engender, surges the energy which maintains the morbid mechanisms and perpetuates disorder. That is, until the motives are harmonized or intelligently directed when order, well-being, and progress supervene. One marrying merely for advantage subserves but a single instinct, that of acquisition or pride. The others atrophy, ferment, or putrefy, with results to correspond, unless the art of wholesome transmutation is acquired, and toward which the ways of attainment will be manifest as we proceed. Motives get their cast in the evolutional period of childhood, when impressions are made and reactions take place in virgin soil, and the primitive impulses and stresses of restraint, reacting upon the particular temperament, determine the manner of adjustment to all that is to follow. At this time, predilections are acquired and standards absorbed which unconsciously and later forgotten color and condition our actions and reactions all through life. And since life itself is so complex and loaded with rigorous buffet, it is little wonder that some of us follow the line of least resistance and compromise on disease. But it is not scientific to generalize, for every case is distinctly individual and the problem is different for each one, although the abnormal conditions resulting usually fall into one of the three main groups of physical, nervous, or mental disorder, and perhaps should now be cataloged in that way. Pathology. In the physical category, upon the basis outlined, we may have affections of any organ or part whatsoever, mental and emotional tension, perhaps unrealized, fastening upon some otherwise transitory element, and with the automatic response of the tissues involved, built up unconsciously into any form of disordered function, even to the point of actual lesion or disease. Physical. By way of making a list, we could mention various forms of headache and neuralgia, eye strain, catarrhal conditions, affections of the nose, ears and throat, bronchial and pulmonary complaints, heart and circulatory disturbances, stomach and digestive difficulties, liver obstinacies, intestinal disorders, both active and passive, affections of the genitourinary system, many paralytic and spasmodic difficulties, including disturbances of gait, of muscular control, and of the joints, as well as disorders of sensation and skin affections, to say nothing of those vague, unusual, unclassified ailments of which there seems to be only one of its kind. Diabetes often established upon such a combination of psychological mechanism as well as many forms of rheumatism. The cases also of cancer and tumor have such a foundation, built up from some chance blow or injury, and tuberculosis is now known to be a psychological disease. Nervous. In the category of nervous disorders, we place those ailments in which, although there is no structural change in any bodily part, there yet exists most trying disability. A list would include neurasthenia or nerve weakness, though the nerves themselves are not affected, nervous depression and nervous irritability, anxiety, phobias or fears, extreme sensitiveness, painful self-consciousness, inability to make decisions, diminished willpower or power of concentration, defective memory, insomnia, somnambulism, persistent bad dreams, emotional instability, hysteria, stammering, obsession or being impelled to some irrational action, kleptomania, for example, and other peculiar tendencies, curious habits, disassociation of personality with its especial phenomena of lapse or loss of the self, as well as many unique, indescribable states attended by sensations of pressing, bursting, burning, tingling, dizziness, chilliness, or tremor. Perverse. There is also another group of derangements which fall short of absolute mental aberration, and wherein the subject seems otherwise quite normal, yet is nonetheless dominated by extremely cunning, cruel, or criminal tendency, alcoholic or drug addiction, or perversion of the sex instinct. Such conditions exist invariably because of the stresses indicated, except when they are the result of definite deficiency. Mental. Under the grouping of true mental aberration, commonly called insanity or technically psychosis, we place here only the psychological forms and omit those due to congenital defect or actual damage to the brain. Those considered will then constitute the purely functional or psychopathological varieties occurring in persons physically normal yet mentally deranged in their adjustment to life, and often requiring temporary or permanent sequestration. A significant way in which to classify the four salient types of mental deviation would be in accordance with the following extremes: those in which the mind runs too fast and feverishly, those in which it is chilled and slow, those in which its radius is too small or circumscribed, and those in which it is too expanded or inflated. Psychiatry likewise denominates four main varieties: mania, or excessive mental excitation, often showing outbursts of violence; melancholia, or extreme mental depression, sometimes attended by self-destroying or mutilating tendencies; and dementia, or marked reduction in mental responsiveness. Of these, the first two are prone to alternate in the same individual, and all are usually attended by delusions, illusions, and hallucinations. There is also the large paranoid group, characterized by special delusions of self-aggrandizement and persecution, in connection with which there is much suspicion and vindictiveness. It should also be remarked that these states do not always exist in distinct and separate type, but more often as mixtures or blends shading into one another. In fact, this exterior differentiation is merely the result of previous efforts to classify and, if possible, assign a physical cause to each one, whereas more recent comprehension of the conflicts among motives, emotions, and other psychic mechanisms make their nature more truly understandable. Origin. In order to account for them fully, however, we must revert back even as far as infancy. The baby is a complete egotist, moved for the first months of his life only by impulses connected with his own objective needs and pleasure, which for the first year is as it should be, when there should begin to be inculcated reasonable discipline and regard for other considerations. But he may have too indulgent proprietors, or seem so self-willed that one hesitates to cross him, when his ego will flourish unduly and fill his entire horizon. Instead of expanding nobly and beautifully, his nature will then grow inward, preventing appreciation of his universe, and causing him to hold himself excessively superior, with his conceptions the only realities. When this is carried to irrational extremes, with attempt to live it literally, we have to call it insanity and put him away to save him from himself. These aberrations may also be induced in an opposite manner, by excessive bullying, suppression, or neglect, which likewise cause the nature to strike in, engendering feelings of self-pity and self-love, which also exaggerate the objective ego and invite a similar train of results. Commentary. It is evident how readily minds so handicapped would come under the influence of the mechanisms traced, and of others more intricate, which give the derangement its particular character. But again, we must say that even these conditions are merely artificial, without endurance of their own, and with the urging, discordant motives harmonized or composed could fade and clear up, which they frequently do. Recovery often takes place, both spontaneously and by treatment, and a great many more could be either saved or restored if these things were more widely understood. Just why one person manifests physical, another nervous, or another mental disorder is a matter of individual circumstances and temperament. But motives and mechanisms constitute the fabric, with accident or destiny presenting the peg to hang it on, until a finer, truer comprehension comes to dissipate it. Failing which the thing becomes a habit, a working compromise for one at bay among contending motives. It becomes an outlet for other feelings kept under pressure, justifies complaint and evasion, and warrants sympathy, which we all have a weakness for, and may even give purpose to otherwise purposeless lives. In fact, the ailment may become a pet and be cherished, coddled, or reveled in accordingly, with corresponding reluctance to relinquish it and get well. Paradox perhaps, yet none the less true, for the fact remains one can get well just as soon as the desire to is single and unmixed. The psychology of sex. Before proceeding further, however, it will be expedient at this point to introduce some paragraphs on sex, a subject encumbered with much misinformation and morbid feeling, and therefore pertinent here. Sex, or rather sexuality, is a salient element in the instinct of self-projection. Already considered, is a form of energy convertible into other manifestations, normal or abnormal, and is now known to be a frequent factor in the problem we have in hand. Definition. Beginning with an attempt at definition, this manifestation could be designated as an impulse, an instinct, a function, an urge, a ferment, an energy, a strength, a weakness, a motive, a blessing or a curse. But however denounced, the fact remains that sex is, and though we cannot precisely define it any more than we can any other elementary force, a study of its manifestations will accrue to our greater efficiency in advancing human welfare. Also, it is exclusively neither a sin nor a sacrament, though often held as both in the same mold of mind. In the first place, it is a faculty of all life, and is incorporated in all lively things as one of the channels through which energy is to find expression. But like all other functions, it has to go through its process of evolution before arriving at maturity. It is the last of the elementary functions to mature, is the most protracted in its development, is the one most ignored, can make the most trouble, and for this and other reasons is naturally hedged in by the greatest amount of inhibition and restraint. Dangers. For this last, there are extremely good and sufficient reasons. Sexual indiscretion may blast the ultimate victim with illegitimacy, or worse, the immediate victim with disease or disgrace, or both, and the subject likewise, together with the risk of demoralization or degeneracy. So for these most cogent reasons, the instinctive attitude of people in general is properly prudent, conservative, and even apprehensive, and is thus communicated even without words to growing children. There are also other grounds for instinctive aversion in the fact that the expression of sex is in parts of the body inherently offensive and giving most shame, and that in this field we are the most vulnerable to ridicule and reproach. No one is at ease when thus indicated, nor invulnerable to such a blow, nor is anyone truly entitled to use such a weapon. But as previously stated, the question of sex is a factor in our problem. So let us not be squeamish here, for whether suppressed or not, the instinct or urge is omnipresent and grows and develops in accordance with the vitality of the individual, and sometimes out of proportion to it. Also, although individuals vary, there is no inherent difference between the sexes in this matter. Evolution. Since the function is not matured until the age of 12 or 15, it must necessarily pass through stages of development before this. Hence, it is seen to manifest imperfectly at earlier periods, awkwardly and incoherently, like any other undeveloped function. In the pre-adolescent child, its expression may be negative or quite indiscriminate, both as regards self and others, groping and blundering like the first experiments in locomotion, and in reason no more reprehensible. Sex consciousness and sex curiosity, though perhaps not identified as such, may even appear at the unbelievable age of 18 months. There then follow innocent or shamefaced attempts to gratify the curiosity with experiments of various indiscriminate kinds, all of which can take place quite spontaneously, for the instinct is autogenetic, grows of itself, and seduction is not essential. These experiments and investigations may be personal, with others, either sex, old or young, or even with other creatures, for sex is universal and may make any appeal, especially at this period of great susceptibility and imperfect restraint. Yet, speaking without prejudice, such spontaneous manifestations are not necessarily reprehensible, in their occasional occurrence entirely harmless, and on no account to be dealt with by drastic intimidation or shaming, which may have an opposite effect from the one intended. Masturbation, for instance, although of course not to be encouraged, is practically universal at some period of life, and if seriously detrimental, nobody would be sane or sound. We place the emphasis in this way because of widespread morbid misconceptions on the subject, and of course do not here refer to an out-and-out incorrigibles. All rightly constituted children have sufficient self-respect of their own to restrain them, without officious assistance, and besides, the process is by nature self-limited, and not in the class of drug habits and others, where some alien intoxicant is taken into the system, there to produce its own unnatural and consuming appetite. Normality. The normal child, growing right along, mentally, morally, and physically, passes through these evolutionary stages, pausing periodically as in all growth, but with the instinct steadily focalizing, and when adolescence becomes maturity, presumably focused and projected exclusively and with proper restraint toward the complementary sex. This would be the normal and desirable, which, if it does not supervene, has been deflected or exaggerated into some other manifestation. Also, it must be borne in mind that growth itself is a process of condensation of absorbed energies, and that when the unit's limit in bulk is reached, or when one gets one's growth, the energies which continue to be absorbed, perhaps in even greater volume, must be absorbed other channels of expression, one of which is in fact the reproductive function, the faculty of discontinuous growth, or the launching of other units. Nor, even in nature, is the ardent blossoming arbitrarily limited to the quantity of fruit which shall be gathered. Bisexuality. In actual nature, there is no such thing as pure distinct type of anything, and this applies also to sex. In early gestation, the embryo is indeterminate, with structures appearing which may develop into either sex apparatus or both. After a few weeks, however, one progresses while the other falls back, so that the child is finally born male or female, but nevertheless retains in its body, all through life, vestiges of organs which, if developed, would constitute those of the opposite sex. The male breast is an obvious example, of which there is a complete set of others with analogues in the female. The secondary sex features are still better known, such as high voice, wide hips, or rounded body in some men, and big bones or angular form in some women. Hence, anatomically, we are a blend, potentially either, with some even manifesting both characteristics. Temperamentally, the shading is also observed. Vigorous, aggressive women and tender, gentle men, to say nothing of mannish women and effeminate men, with constitution and tendencies to correspond. Some men even manifest a menstrual period, with or without sanguineous effusion from some membrane, as well as change of life. But these traits do not necessarily match each other, for many lovely women are found in unlovely bodies, while a splendid masculine body does not always imply a manly man. Psychopathology. And now we can conceive of deviations in the sphere of the sex instinct itself. Many are more or less naturally inverted or modified in this respect, with genuinely homosexual or perverted proclivities, and many may easily be influenced that way in the delicate, unformed period of childhood, which brings us down to the second factor in this problem, namely the psychology of sex, within and without. The function is very, very far from being a mere physical or so-called animal one, for it is most intimately permeated and influenced by ideas and by the psychological elements we have previously discussed, such as suggestion, association, dissociation, and others. The child does not grow up in solitude and separate, but is hemmed in and environed physically, mentally, and spiritually by family, associates, and strangers, all imbued with varying attitudes in this matter, which they may be only too ready to impart to him. Hence, his own development is modified or distorted by this outside psychology as well as by that originating within him. Shame, fear, or abuse may cause certain propensities to strike in and take deep subconscious root, which, if unmolested, would have dwindled and disappeared. Or, adventitiously suggested charm may cause pernicious practices to flourish, which otherwise would never have manifested. That forbidden fruit seems most desirable is always true. And since in this sphere we are more sensitive than in any, too much officiousness may overemphasize some phase and give it too much interest, with results to be regretted. Some sexual manifestations are instinctively regarded as beyond the limit, namely those that are incestuous, homosexual, with animals, or otherwise grossly perverted. And these, if persistent, place the subject at serious disadvantage with society, or if artificially repressed, make for intolerable distraction, which exposes the victim to the various pathological mechanisms detailed. Rationalization. The problem is always peculiarly individual, calls for the utmost discretion and tact, if not hands-off, while mere morbid dread is never in order. Respectful confidence, with enlightenment where needed, is the best generalization on the management of children. We have here to deal with an energy generically named libido, which, if arbitrarily throttled at one point, is liable to find exit at another less desirable, so that the proper course is to inspire transformation into other activities of true worth and genuine personal appeal. This process, known as transmutation, or sublimation is quite possible, for in it the purely sexual functions become dormant or latent, just as the woman's breast is dormant when not engaged in lactation. To be truly successful, however, there must be a genuine inspiration or motive which literally displaces all else and prompts to some definitely cherished activity which gives full and satisfying expression to the dynamic libido involved. For sex experience in reality is intended and desirable for the further development of the individual and the service of the race, so that the reasons for sublimation, if it is to be successful, must be innate and vital. Mere arbitrary repression results in blighting and degeneracy, though many choose this negative course, rather than incur the unwelcome risks and responsibilities of actual function. It should also be understood that sexual indulgences of whatever kind are not in themselves a cause of insanity or any other form of disorder, though inordinate self-reproach for them may induce distraction like any other complex, with symptoms in consequence. Not be it remembered from the specific physical acts, as is commonly supposed, but through distorted, stressful, or painful feelings concerning them. The gross sexuality, for example, which attends some forms of mental defect, is an accompanying result, but not necessarily a cause of this condition. Summary. Summing it all up, this is a delicate, sensitive, active living field of intense potency, yet hedged about with all sorts of dangers and morbid ideas which can complicate life for anyone. It has already been indicated that sexually we are more susceptible, vulnerable, and intense than in any other way. So it is easy to see how suggestion, distraction, repression, and dissociation could subconsciously operate here and constitute this the source whence disorder is perpetuated, especially if the earliest manifestations came to be considered particularly abnormal or heinous or perhaps persistent, and to call for repudiation so extreme as to amount to self-immolation. The wisest procedure would be rational disposition of the unwelcome impulse, which in so many cases is possible. For these repressed, perverted impulses, when not disposed of, are frequently responsible for many abnormal states and much erratic conduct, not, be it repeated, on account of any direct effect from the physical acts, but by reason of the morbid attitude concerning them. Nor does everything continue always serene, even under presumably ideal conditions, for there are various fluctuations, conflicts, and distractions which are bound to intrude, however one is situated. So doubtless it will be enlightening at this point to insert some remarks on the psychology of the sexes. The psychology of the sexes. Truly and tersely stated, the psychology of the sexes is instantly revealed by contemplation of their respective prototypes, the egg and the sperm. Considering the egg, which is supremely female, we find it essentially single, static, nutrient, fecund, contoured, enclosing, vegetative, recurrent, subjective, sufficient. On the other hand, the sperm or male element is multiple, motile, galvanic, linear, lacinate, delving, cleaving, perforating, animal, exigent, objective, spent. In a word, femaleness is yoked, while maleness is disseminated. And here we see that nothing in the universe is fortuitous, not even names or words. in the interrelationships between the two, we find that there are both reciprocating needs and reciprocal detriments. The sperm needs the egg to renew its existence. The egg needs the sperm to live. Yet the single sperm is lost when encompassed by the egg, and the egg begins to disrupt when impregnated. Hence, the yearning and the spurning in the more evolved forms, man and woman. But salvation and immortality are achieved in the product of the union, which partakes of both. Taking into account the observations previously made on bisexuality and realizing the disproportional combination of each of these elements in any individual, we can see that mere marrying is very, very far from being a conclusive permanent solution. The stresses of sentiment which are apt to supervene may find outlet as previously indicated, and sometimes are visited upon the fruits of the union both ways. By this we mean that an inordinate though subconscious attachment or antipathy may sometimes develop between parent and child with pernicious effect upon the psychology of the latter. Children should be weaned progressively but lovingly to a larger and larger life, not stultified by constricting ties. For the stresses and cleavages prevailing in this most vital relationship, that of a created thing with its matrix, are responsible intrinsically for much of the life that follows, be it the pursuit of a profession, the choice of a life partner, the form of religion, or even the kind of government one is content to live under. We here speak objectively as before, so should now begin to prepare the way for a different and finer comprehension. The personality. But before proceeding to the exposition of good health and healing, which now succeeds, let us revert for a moment to our presentation on basic human motives as outlined on previous pages, and here discuss the graphic representation of them which follows, venturing thereby to submit what presumes to be a complete analytical diagram of human personality in terms of its actuating principles, trends, and fruits, and amplified to show its unnecessary distortions. Triunity. Up out of the eternal triune urge to be, to do, and to know come matter, energy, and consciousness, organized individually into body, function, and mind, for a life that is then predestined by its three basic instincts which conserve existence, ensure activity, and sustain confidence, to traverse its span toward growth. Disproportion. But here, objectively, there may be disproportion and distress. The instinct of self-preservation may dwindle into self-neglect, the prompting to self-projection degenerate into self-indulgence, and the consideration of self-respect disintegrate into self-pity. On the other hand, too, the first can harden into selfishness, the second be inflamed to mere self-aggrandizement, and the third become swollen into self-conceit. Distress. And finally, three forms of anguish supervene when the welfare of any of our triplicity is in jeopardy. Self-preservation quakes when dropped into a pocket of fear. Self-projection may agonize in a baffled conflict of suspense, while self-respect will stifle if sunk in an abysm of shame. These three, shame, fear, and suspense, are the cardinal human torments, and the last is the most unendurable. Correspondingly, in terms of our previous psychology, there may be some complex to confess, conflict to resolve, or confusion to calm in order to restore integrity. The soul. But has the page only one side? Let us turn it over and see. Supplementing and transcending urge. we find that there is aspiration. Consecrating self-preservation is self-sacrifice. Balancing self-projection, there is self-control. Ennobling self-respect is self-surrender. Self-sacrifice yields the joy of service. Self-control holds the might of power, while self-surrender knows the bliss of peace, which together build, by renunciation, the very acme of vouchsafed attainment and dissipate all phantasms. Spirit. And now, where is this human page with its two contrasting sides that is you or that is me? It rests all the while in the unseen, all-cherishing security of the everlasting arms. So in truth, there are no phantasms. Yet we must not forget that in the term of this objective existence, there are both sides to our page. So let us show its measure of deference to each. End of part 1. All right, let's head over to the next video. Before we do, may I ask, can you hit that like button? Thank you so very much. And I'll be at the next video with part 2, Good Health and Healing.